Hello, welcome to Aussie Island Life. This is my farm find wood lathe that is almost in a condition that makes it suitable for use. Done a few modifications along the way of making it pretty, and this video here is really to talk about two quick release cams, one that I've installed on the tool rest and one on the tailstock. So just to kick off, I'll show you how they work, and then we'll have a look at how I've managed to put them together. At the moment the tailstock's fairly mobile. Up and down the bed. Turn the handle about 30 degrees, 40 degrees, and it's solid as a rock. Tool rest's a little bit different. I didn't want to have the release mechanism anywhere in here where the wood is going to be rotating, so I've got myself a lever. You can see it gold down there against the background. At the moment it's in the release position, so I can move the tool around wherever I wish. Simply reach down, move the lever out of the way, and everything's rock solid there, won't move. Release the lever, and I've got that mobility again. I'll show you how I put them together. These are the components of the tailstock assembly that I've constructed. I'll point out first of all that it's designed to be functional, and it seems to be, rather than pretty, and I don't have any great metalworking equipment. I do weld after a fashion, and I've also got a grinder and a hacksaw and a couple of files. I don't have any milling equipment or lathes of any description, but the components as follows: a couple of big nuts welded onto an angle, and then this piece of angle hollowed out in the right places. This hole in the middle here is where it goes down through the hole in the tailstock, and the lever and threaded rod goes through those two nuts. We talk about the threaded rod. It's simply a threaded rod that's been welded onto or screwed in and welded onto a big nut, and then another piece of straight steel's been welded on there. But the threaded rod has been ground out, as you can see, and there's about a third of the material removed there. But if I rotate it towards us, you can see that that's radiused up, and it gets less and less and less material removed. So if you picture this inside the assembly, if that central nut is hanging off there and hanging onto the base of the tailstock, the support plate below, as you rotate this, it gets pulled up towards the bed of the lathe and then tightens onto it. I'll just put it together so you can have a look at the components in their assembled form. So here we are with the assembly as it normally would be, and if you can picture that this base plate here is designed to push up or pull up against the bottom of the lathe, going through the centre of the tailstock. So rotate the lever, and the idea is that that all gets pulled up, and as you can see, it's in its I guess relaxed position there, and as I rotate the handle around like so, it's very hard to see from here. Basically this starts getting pulled towards itself, and indeed clamps on the bed of the lathe under here. The spring's in place really just to push the plate away from the bed of the lathe when you want to move the tailstock around, just to keep it out of the way so it doesn't get caught on anything. And it's only a fairly light gauge spring, so as soon as you turn the handle it tightens up quite nicely. These two nuts here are loose on the threaded rod below, and they simply fill the gap that's in the tailstock. It's a fairly big, about an inch diameter hole, and having these two nuts up there just helps locate it centrally on that hole. The only, I guess, careful assembly that has to take place are these two nuts down here. There's two of them so that you can lock them, and what you're looking to do is to screw them up so that the base plate is, just loose, and you can move the tailstock around quite easily. and as soon as you rotate the handle, then you want it to go very tight. So you adjust it and then turn these nuts in opposite directions and lock them in place, so that that's pretty much where it stays until you want to get a couple of spanners and undo it again. Fairly simple, really. Hope it makes sense. This is the tool rest locking mechanism, all disassembled, and just going through them from top to bottom. What we've got here is a threaded rod that passes through the centre of the tool rest assembly or base. The top of it has been ground square so that it slides nicely up and down, and what that does, it simply stops that threaded rod from moving when I operate the lever against it. So it's almost like a little locking device there that stops rotation. I've also put a little bolt through there just to hold everything in place so this nut doesn't screw off by itself when you're not expecting it. So that's all that is. And then of course we put the base plate on. That goes on next, and that pushes up against the bed of the lathe. The lathe I've got has got a support structure underneath it, so I then need to have a spacer so that the lever comes out below that and doesn't interfere with that lathe structure, but that's just a bit of steel tube. A couple of washers on the working surfaces, and then we get to the interesting parts, which is the lever itself, a piece of steel rod welded onto a nut that's been cut in half and also hollowed out. So there again, this is the hollowed out nut, so it's free to move on that threaded rod, and that works against another nut that has similarly been treated, although this one is threaded now, so this one is fixed onto the threaded rod. And then the final piece is another nut that simply locks against that half nut. Now, as you can imagine, when these nuts are in the lined up position and the beveled edges are in line with each other, there's movement available to the tool rest. But when we start to rotate and those bevels interfere, what you find is that it pushes the base of the tool rest up against the bed of the lathe and locks everything in place. I'll show you how it works a little bit, but that's pretty much the way it works. Just a filed off nut or a ground off nut, filed smooth so that it works against another one quite happily. I'll just try and give you a bit of a close-up of how this all works. I've got my lever down here which I'll grab hold of, and you can see that there's movement in this. The base plate that's pulling up against the bottom of the lathe bed here is free. I can move that around, and then as I tighten, see the lever underneath there tightening, that's then pushed through those two nuts working against each other, the base plate up against the lathe bed, and that's all quite solid. I'll just go down below and see if you can see that there. So that's in the loose position. You can see the bevels on those nuts is lined up pretty well. As I move that around, they no longer line up, and as a result everything pushes up against the base plate and locks it in place, and then loose again.